Does the Jesus of Christianity answer prayers? This is a great question because it does highlight the differences in the views of who Jesus actually is between different religious systems. Some might say that he's a charlatan, that he never really was who he claimed to be, that he was just a guy, an upstart, nothing special about him. Others might say, as Christians do, that he's God incarnate, and as God incarnate, of course he'd be able to answer prayers. Others might say, no, Jesus was legitimate. He was just a prophet, but he was nothing more than that, and therefore he can't answer prayers, and anything he did was by God's permission. So this is an incredibly important question, especially when we're thinking about different religious views or non-religious views about who Jesus actually is. This is important because answering prayers does seem to be the sole prerogative of the divine being, of God himself. And so if Jesus actually answers prayers, that says a lot about who Jesus actually is, not just in terms of his authority, but also in terms of his heart for you and for me and who God is to you and me in the times of our greatest need. Now, the first thing we might be thinking of is, well, Jesus himself prays. How can a God who answers prayers be the kind of God who prays to either himself or to someone else? And that seems to be a contradiction. But Jesus is praying, when you find Jesus praying in the New Testament, what Jesus is doing is expressing two things. One, his humanity, because Christians don't believe that Jesus is just God. They believe that he is God in the sense that he has the divine nature, and that he's also human in that he has a human nature. The two aren't mixed, but they exist at the same time in the person of Jesus. It's called the hypostatic union. It's not completely comprehensible, but it is apprehensible. It does make sense. Again, our nature and person distinction is that God is what, and human beings are a what, and they share the same who is the person of Jesus. So we would expect the human in Jesus to pray to God. And because the human does have a God, like all humans do, we would expect him to have a God. But the divine nature in Jesus, when Jesus is praying, because there aren't two wills in Jesus' existence, there's one will, but the divine nature, God the Son, incarnate in the Son of God, is praying to the Father out of a voluntary submission and out of mere communication. It's just a way in which the Son communicates to the Father. Now, the Son willfully subordinates himself to the Father, much like I willfully subordinate myself to the President of the United States. No one would argue that just because I don't hold the office of President means that somehow I'm of a lesser being than the person who currently holds that office. He just simply holds an office that me and others elected him to, but he holds a higher authority than I do in this land. It doesn't mean he's more human than me. It doesn't mean I'm less human than him. It just means that he has an office and an authority. So God the Son submits himself, willfully submits himself to the authority of the Father in order to effectuate a plan that God has worked out for humanity. It doesn't mean he's less than God. It doesn't mean that he's more than God. It means that he is simply co-equal with God, but chooses, as part of the divine plan, to subordinate himself to the Father during Jesus' earthly incarnational ministry. And so that explains why Jesus is found praying. It's communication, and it's a willful subordination to God the Father. Now, it's interesting when Jesus does instruct us how to pray, and he instructs us in Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 to 15, and in Luke chapter 11, verses 1 to 13. When Jesus instructs us how to pray, it's often called the Lord's Prayer, but the reality is this is not how the Lord himself prayed. What he says is interesting. The disciples say, Lord, teach us how to pray. And Jesus says, when you pray, pray this way. Our Father who is in heaven. And he begins by saying, our Father. Not in the sense that he's saying it's my Father the same way it's your Father. He's saying when you pray, say it's your Father. When Jesus prays to God the Father, you'll notice something. He either says, Father or my Father, directly. Jesus' relationship to God as Father is different in quality to our relationship to God as Father. It's very, very different. And so that's why you see a different form of instruction. Now, the question is, does Jesus actually have the authority to answer prayer? And you see examples of this all throughout the Bible. Jesus, for example, in Mark chapter 2, forgives the sins of a man who's paralyzed who comes to him to be healed. And the guy came to him to be healed. And Jesus, the first thing he says is, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." Which, of course, is like, wait, hold on a second. I didn't come for that. I came for the whole legs don't move thing. And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven you. The Pharisees, the religious leaders say, how can you possibly do this? Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus says, so that you can know that I can forgive sins, which is easy to say, I'm going to do something really hard, which is heal this man. And Jesus healed him in response to his prayers. So Jesus does, in fact, answer prayers. He is frequently found in the New Testament healing the lame and the sick who ask him for help. In fact, there are people who say, you need to but say the word, and it will be done to someone who's not even in the room or not even in the vicinity. And Jesus answers prayers that way. He has the authority to answer prayers. And he says in John chapter 14, verses 13 to 14, that if you ask anything in his name and according to God's will, Jesus will do it. Jesus is the one who can do it. Jesus has the authority. He claimed to have the same authority that God does for answering prayers. And he demonstrates that over and over again in virtually every page of the Gospels, it seems, that Jesus is answering prayer constantly. A better question is not, does the Jesus of Christianity answer prayers? The real question is, does the Jesus of history answer prayers? And the answer is, he has the authority to do so, and he does so. You can trust him.